Okay, good afternoon. I'm Dr. Patricia Miller, and today's presentation, which I'm video recording because I'm not able to be in Barcelona with the rest of you, is called Understanding Self-Determination and Healing Within the Complex Nature of Trauma. So I welcome you to this presentation, and I hope this piece of research will provide you with some very informative information about the role of self-determination and its importance in the healing of trauma. Okay, so I would just like to do a land acknowledgement in the spirit of respect and reciprocity and truth. This presentation is being done on Treaty 7 land in Calgary, Alberta. Just a little bit of get to know Dr. Miller. The brief on my entry into this area of research and practices. I've been practicing and researching now for probably 25 plus years, and I'm currently the director and owner of the Calgary Therapy Institute, where a lot of our primary focus in the work is in relation to helping people self-determine their mental health needs across the lifespan. We have probably about 26 people that work at the clinic at this point, and my focus is on traumatic experience and its impact on people's lives. I work with people that have experienced sexual assaults, child abuse, first responders, police, military, EMS, RCMP, and all other types of traumatic experiences for children, youth, and adults. I'm also a community-based researcher. My first PhD is in behavioral social science, and so I'm a social scientist and have conducted community-based research in the community, specializing with participatory action research methodologies, and I'm also a qualitative researcher through my clinical psychology PhD, SID, and I'm primarily looking at trauma across the lifespan and trauma-focused care. I'm a sessional instructor at Mount Royal University in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, and again, my teachings are primarily focused at this time in the area of interpersonal violence across the lifespan. So this research comes in around one of my kind of passions and areas of interest. We know a lot of trauma-informed practices across the lifespan have been more focused on expert knows best. It's that idea that doctor knows best, expert knows best. But I've been focusing on this idea of the person with the lived experience knows best. They know themselves, they've lived in the lived experience of the traumatic impact, and also when it comes to healing across the lifespan, they're the person and within that lived experience, they are going to be the person that knows what's going to work, what doesn't. Though they'll need the help of really good qualified professionals, they are the people that will ultimately know whether this healing modality will work for them or not. So this research that we're going to present today, or I'm going to present, and I've been helped by my research assistant Vince, he's been helping me put this information together, has three primary questions of focus, and they are: what are the unique healing experiences people who come from diverse backgrounds engage in as they live with the impact of traumatic experience? What does the role of self-determination play when people who live with the impact of traumatic experiences decide what type of healing they need? And how does the act of self-determination, determining their healing, allow people who live with the impact of traumatic experiences to live in a more meaningful and less hopeless and helpless way? I mean, hypothesize, as we were looking at what are a couple hypotheses in relation to this research, what would correlate, what wouldn't. You could look at self-determination doesn't matter, or self-determination does matter. So this piece of research that was conducted had 24 participants, and we'll talk a bit about demographics in a follow-up slide. Their inclusive criteria for being in the actual research was their traumatic lived experiences included robberies, surviving a natural disaster, road accidents, traumatic illness, hospitalization, racism, discrimination, bullying, or vicarious trauma because of the professional work they did. What was not included in this research was traumatic experiences specific to sexual assault, horrific death, war-related trauma, and child sexual abuse. It was a non-probability sampling process, snowball process in relation to people were referred into the study by other professionals that had been working with them in the larger field of psychology, social work, or medicine. And adapted, we used an interpretive phenomenological approach, qualitative research looking at the phenomena of trauma and the role of self-determination, the possible role of self-determination in the healing of trauma as we gathered the lived experiences of the participants. A lot of the literature review out there, supports various types of therapeutic modalities, treatment programs. Traumatic impact and treatment has been well researched because a lot of that information then feeds out how programs are developed, how insurance pays for different type of treatments, how practitioners are trained to provide those type of treatments. And yet what we were really looking at in this research was understanding what is the role of the person that has gone through the lived experience ultimately as the expert on their own experience, and how could that play out in the healing of their trauma. For this research project, one of the things I chose as a lens, a therapeutic lens or a theory that would help me sort of look at the data, the lived experience data, was postmodern feminist theory. And that came from this idea of whose voices were included, whose voices weren't included, really looking at the lived experience voice may not be heard in some of that expert-oriented information and research that's been developed in treatment and application. So again, doctor knows best versus person knows best. So I was looking at whose voices weren't heard and how do we find those voices and allow them to be the expert on their own lived experience. The methodology in a general sense was non-experimental research that allowed for the gathering of a broad amount of unfiltered data. That's that lived experience from a relatively small number of individuals, 24 individuals. Each interview was 1 to 2 hours in person, online, depending on what people needed. And what we were looking for is to seek that understanding around divergent and convergent ways to heal trauma. So we didn't need everyone to converge and those themes to be, relevant to every person. We were looking at divergence and what was different, right? Because that allowed us to hear each individual story as their own, and it helps create a more robust, diverse narrative around the healing of trauma and the role of self-determination. It was an unstructured format interview which left the participants able to articulate their experiences around those 3 questions I talked about in a previous slide in a way they felt comfortable to speak to. And the interviews were recorded using a digital voice recorder, and then subsequently transcripts were done through analysis, or were analyzed using the NVivo software for data analysis. A lot of the qualitative research from my own perspective was really looking at new knowledge, right? And trying to create a high degree of reliability as we looked at that more interpretive lens and phenomenological approach allowed for there to be analysis of people's stories. Again, looking at the phenomena. And the phenomena is what's relevant, what's not relevant, where's convergent, where's divergent, and just taking those themes out. An interpretive methodology then really allows for themes to be explored. It's not like you're looking for the quantitative, like get to the exact. You're looking for robust and trying to figure out where those themes will show up that are similar or dissimilar. So within the demographic sample itself, there was 24 participants. It was binary between male, female, and you can see that we had more female participants than male. And the average age, your highest category was in the 30s, and we had the age cutoff 25 to 40. So here are some of the results in our first question. So remember, the first question was, what are the unique healing experiences people who come from diverse backgrounds engage as they live with the impact of traumatic experiences? That was a very broad-based question, just trying to get a sense of what people have been doing in a general sense for their healing around living with a traumatic experience, which then shapes into some sort of trauma. So social connections, what you were really seeing is that people were looking for some level of social social connection, whether a formal relationship, it could be family, romantic, or informal, something in the community. And those social connections allowed them to have a space to talk, to be heard, to be seen, or to be with someone that showed up for them in some meaningful way. Other folks wanted to be alone. So you see that divergency in their unique healing stories. Some people wanted to be alone. It felt like it was too much to have to be with people. So they chose to be more in isolation. And that could be isolation in doing something, or just isolation where they had a chance to be in their own thoughts and their experiences. Some people chose solace. Solace is that real deep, right sense of self where you get to be away from. One participant said, I needed time away from people as I had to heal from the traumatic experience. Another participant said, I put people aside, I set up boundaries and gave myself space. So you see in that setting up boundaries is the right to determine that I need space. Some people engage therapy. One participant said therapy helps you, takes you to the next level, because you can try all of these things that you're trying to do to make it through the world and not feel so horrible. So you're given some tools, some ways to be in that trauma, living with trauma, and find a better outcome or just a better space. Another participant said, when I had finally found the right therapist, that is what got me healthy and strong. So finding your right therapist, where they determine this is the right person to be my therapist at this time in my life, because it of course can change across the lifespan. And another person said therapy helped to build strategies that brought some structure to my world. Some folks engaged distractions. I chose drinking, partying, running as fast as I could, and I just thought that was the normal. So in that state, they did choose some distractions, which we might as care professionals say aren't as healthy, but that choice allowed them to know they had a way to deal with that moment in time. Some people worked extra hours to keep themselves distracted, because being distracted helped myself to not have to think about the traumatic event. And other people consumed a lot of online social media, adult media. Again, these are their reported stories, things that they chose to do at that time to get through living with the impact of trauma. Some people were in denial and they wanted to hide from the impact. They wanted to not remember. And one person said, I started out doing something that I did not realize I was doing, but at some point I became more deliberate and methodical in it. So again, people would use denial, just not wanting to name that traumatic impact and then living with trauma, and denial became a way to self-determine some sort of wellness. In question number 2, what role does self-determination play when people who live with the impact of traumatic experience decide what type of healing they need? So in our results, what we found was the capacity to decide. One participant said, I need to make the choice about what medical procedure I needed to engage, as choice became part of healing. Another participant said, I started to recognize I don't really owe anyone anything. I recognize you cannot heal unless you choose to. So again, capacity, that sense of your choice, to self-determine choice around capacity, what you wanted to do around your healing. Also, capacity to adapt came up as part of the results to that question. I need to be able to choose how I would adapt to the impact of the traumatic events. Most of the time I'm hiding if I'm not really confident about going out in public, because then the traumatic event or impact isn't as visible. So again, capacity to adapt, to know what I need so I can live with the impact of this traumatic experience. Self-determination, participants reported the importance of self-determination in the healing of trauma. One participant said, I built such trust in myself that I know I can handle challenging things, whether it's physically, mentally, or emotionally. So that's that self-determination where I now can trust myself to determine, what do I need? How do I need it? When do I need it? Another participant said, I learned what depression was. I learned how anxiety affects people. It was like this huge eye-opener that literally drove me into a career in psychology. So for this participant, determining, right, understanding their mental health, understanding impact, actually has opened up another avenue in their own life process where they're choosing a career in psychology. External strategies was also recognized. I will still continue to surf, and I dive first into into it as intense as I can, like soccer. So someone was using an external strategy that was identified as some sort of sport, as some sort of capacity to do things. Someone else said read, 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 and read. Again, using external strategies that I choose to help me in my healing of trauma. Another category that came up as a theme was support systems. Bonding with family helped one of our participants. They chose to connect to their family. Another person said, I'm very grateful and very lucky that I've had some really, really close girlfriends of mine that I've had since I was 14, and they were kind of being in the background watching everything happen and watching me spin and watching me bounce. So they were there to be sort of like that, team of support, people witnessing and being there as needed. Another category was personal therapy. I can't talk to my parents and I can't talk to my best friend, yet the therapist was explaining things like I'm more on the understanding side. So just having a therapist, that personal therapy that could help them to better understand what was going on. Another participant said, once I was in therapy, I was explaining it to my therapist. I was so blown away at what I was learning in therapy and how I was improving. To have that safe therapeutic space in that person, and also that understanding space of who they are in that lived experience. Risk factors came up in this question as well in the healing of trauma. Some people identified there were risk factors that they were experiencing, such as being isolated and unsafe, just sort of left me scarred and scared to leave my little bubble of comfort. Another person said the thought process of thinking that you're all alone, and I think that was the hardest thing in my thinking. So these were some of the risk factors that came up around that role of self-determination and the healing of trauma, things they recognized. Question number 3, the last question, how does the act of self-determining their healing allow people who live with the impact of traumatic experiences to live in a more meaningful and less hopeless, helpless way? Positive outcomes. So people reported, one participant said, I've developed a positive relationship with my sister and dad. So again, self-determining this aspect of relationship in relation to their healing. Another participant said, I really needed to take time and understand how I needed to grieve, because for a long time it was just like I was pushing feelings down. We know that a lot of grief and loss is around traumatic experiences and impacts, so just recognizing that sense of being able to take time to grieve became really important in the role of self-determination. Positive perspectives. I wanted to look at things in a positive way, even though it happened. So the choice of thought, right, to choose to see things differently in a more positive perspective. Another participant said, I just kind of felt, well, there's nothing I can do at this point. What's done is done. I can't change it. I can really look forward to the future and how things will get better. That choice of positive perspective. Self-determination. Participants talked about a level of responsibility, and like self-determination, I want to challenge myself, as noted by one participant. Another person said, it feels more like the future is possible and I'm capable of doing whatever I want if I put my mind to it, and it feels just a little bit more open and less restrained. And the last person in this component said, it like this path I need to go through to achieve my happiness where I really want to be. Another theme was resiliency. A participant said you have to have self-compassion on a daily, hourly basis. Another participant said, I would say I'm pretty good at taking steps to just decide to face what has happened. So that resilience that we see a lot of time that comes out of difficult experiences and traumatic impact, our participants talked about resiliency as well. Developing internal strategies was another theme. Praying so hard and praying that I was going to be okay was one of our participants. What they shared is their lived experience around self-determining prayer was important. Another participant said, I changed what I thought about God, as he did not hold up his part of the deal for me and my spouse. So another participant identified that they developed this capacity to change how they thought. And another participant said, I take a deep breath and I tell myself, let it go, or do what I want to be like, or okay, I could let it just fuck off and be cool. So again, using that narrative that they use this language to be able to action out the agency of self-determination and find those internal strategies to be able to work their way through trauma. Trauma triggers came up as something people self-determined they're better able to identify. One person said, sometimes things on my phone can be a trigger, and so maybe now I can kind of leave my phone in my pocket. Another person said, I still go back, my mind goes back to that day where, and like I said, this is years ago. So again, that self-determination, understanding triggers now helps them in their healing process. And another participant said, every time you backslide, it causes stress, it causes problem, it just kills everyone inside because it's not something that you have control over. But being able to identify it as a trauma trigger became really important in self-determining the act of healing, to know what's happening, to know that this is a trigger and that I will have some internal strategies to deal with, or I know how to reach external and find people I can connect with. So some of the conclusions that came from this research is that, number one, and this is so important, all participants identified self-determination as playing an important role in the healing of trauma. You know, when I saw that result at the end of all the research, the process, and hearing the stories and looking at the data, I just thought, what a powerful new piece of knowledge to be able to understand that self-determination, that a person's self-determinations, whether they understand triggers, that they can choose how to heal, that they can choose who to heal with, who not to heal with, that act of self-determining was one of the most important pieces in the healing of trauma. Although the literature recognizes there is no unique intervention, and we know that there isn't one size that fits, all healing, and I think it's really important to understand that. But what this research says is that the role of self-determination was a common denominator for all participants in this research. We know that clients who've been impacted by traumatic experiences will need to have various modalities around psychological care or any sort of personal care or support, PAT or whatever it is the modality is, and yet how it's determined by themselves at that time and who with will be the most important feature of their trauma or their care around their traumatic experience and how they live with trauma across the lifespan. So technically what we know from this research is doctor does not know best, that the person living with the traumatic experience, which we call trauma, knows best. Implications are that professionals need to understand then that engaging the client in that healing process, offering the knowledge we can offer, but looking to establish that safe, connective, caring relationship and honoring the story of those that are seeking to heal, and that active self-determining, the next step for them, that what is it that they determine now from this relationship and the modalities we bring to them, or they reject it all and don't come back because that's part of what they needed. And hopefully we've offered enough support and other resources so that they can agency out other ways to heal. And I think in some populations that we know are more at risk, that we need to take this in and really look at some of those other social factors that come up around cultural discrimination and barriers faced, and how do we support people to self-determine their story and what agency they need so they can be seen better, in all types of research that's done in the area of trauma, traumatic impact, and the healing of trauma. And I think being very aware of vulnerabilities on, the intersect of social barriers and discrimination, and as professionals, how we come into that, and we bring this new knowledge that we are looking for self-determination as being an active resistance, an active agency, and really that act itself can be very healing for all people that have experienced some sort of traumatic experience across the lifespan. I want to thank you for taking the time to be a part of this presentation today, and all knowledge is going to be left with the committee and the conference so that you can access it, and all references are on the back page. Thank you so much and take care.